We're going to record it then. Each of you should have a handout. Kaylin's given out. If you don't have one, it says Natural Remedies, Charcoal, and Spirit of Prophecy on the top. If you don't have one, raise your hand and we'll get one to you. I just want you to look at that quickly and notice some of the things that I put involved that 150 plus years ago in her day, Sister White used charcoal for. Notice it says people with great pain, bruised hands, inflammation, severe inflammation of the eyes, indigestion, painful swellings of the knee, inflammation of the bowels, great pain, snake bites, sting of reptiles and poisonous insects. And so charcoal is not new. It's been around a while. Now, one of the things that I appreciate so much about God's simple remedies is they're affordable and they're simple. And they do no harm. There's very few, if any, side effects to charcoal. We'll talk about that as we get on in. One thing that I would like to mention as a caveat as we talk about natural remedies and specifically charcoal, it's as though I have my binoculars and we're looking at a great distance to the very tip of a huge iceberg. There's no way we can really cover and do justice to the topic of natural remedies in a 30-minute presentation. This is just an introduction to charcoal, what it is, how we can use it, and a few simple ways to use it, and what it's used for. Natural remedies, of course, are a biblical concept. Do you remember who had the lump of figs? Anybody remember? Which king? Hezekiah. King Hezekiah had to boil, and Isaiah, what it was, told him, put a lump of figs on it. Jesus, when he put the clay poultice on the man's eyes, there's a poultice, there's another natural remedy. So it's a biblical concept. Now, what I want to talk to you about today, obviously, is, we'll have some overheads up here, is activated charcoal. And we'll talk about why we call it activated charcoal as we go on. Charcoal is unrivaled as a simple remedy, and it's actually been called the universal antidote. How many medical people do I have here? How many of you have heard about using charcoal in ER? Okay, all right. It's used in the emergency room for poisonings, so it's not just a natural remedy, it's actually used in the medical field for more reasons than just poisoning. It's used industrially. My husband uses charcoal almost every day in his respirator that he wears when he has to go into places that don't have pure air. So it's used also for gas purification, decaffeination, gold purification, metal extraction, water purification, sewage treatment, of course the respirators, the air filters. And it's also used in fish tanks. And I have an interesting story, if I have time, I'll share with you about fish tank charcoal a little bit later. Charcoal is made from many different substances. It can be made from wood, from coal, from corn cobs, from rice hulls, coconut hulls, lots of different things, bone. But the most effective forms of charcoal are made from bone and coal because these have about a 90%, they're about 90% carbon. And so they're far more effective than charcoal made from other substances. Now, you can make charcoal at home and it's quite effective, but the activation process, we're going to talk about that, is what makes it far more effective. Activation was invented around the turn of the 20th century, and what it is basically is the charcoal material is pulverized and then it's exposed to air or steam at very high temperatures. If you'll notice on this, you can see these pits. I don't know why that screen is flashing like that, but this is the same picture enlarged, but this is it. Just so whenever you see the grain of charcoal, it almost looks like, if you've ever seen a scanning electron microscope picture of bone, it kind of looks like that. It's very porous, and that's very important in the use of charcoal. This increases the surface area of charcoal exponentially. Activated charcoal can absorb up to 250 to 350 times its weight. One small section of charcoal, 2/5 of an inch squared, has a surface area of 33 yards. 33 square yards. So, I mean, we're looking at something that can really absorb a large amount of material. So, let me show you this. This, actually, I borrowed from a water purification website, the picture. It's used in water filters. If you'll notice the picture, it almost looks like a bronco tree in the lungs. So you'll see all these little pathways that substances can go down into, and charcoal absorbs it. Now, you may notice that I am not saying absorb. I'm saying adsorb. It's not because I'm a hick from the south, it's because there's a difference. Adsorb is, well, if you look at the little boy in the picture with the sponge, when you put a sponge in a bucket of water and it gets completely saturated and you pick it up out of the water, what happens? Water is absorbed, but when it's completely saturated and you bring it out of the water, what happens to the water? It begins to drip out, doesn't it? That's absorbed. It can easily be let go, as it were, from the sponge. But if you look at adsorb, it's an actual chemical bond to the surface of the charcoal. So it doesn't let go, as it were. And that's a very important concept when we look at using charcoal for poisonings. Because if you ingested charcoal to take care, for instance, in the emergency room, if somebody came in and they had overdosed on arsenic or strychnine or aspirin or Tylenol or something, if charcoal readily let go like a sponge, if it only absorbed, what's the use of taking it? Because the charcoal can let go of it inside the body and you still die of poisoning. But the adsorption means that it chemically bonds. It's kind of, I think they call it an electrostatic bond to the surface of the charcoal molecule so that it doesn't let go. And it passes through the body. Now, I'm not a scientist. If you've studied something else, you're more than welcome to share, but this is the research that I have found in the 20, 30 plus years that I've been doing natural remedies. So, at any rate. Okay. Now, early demonstrations of the effectiveness of charcoal were pretty bold. Back in the early 1800s, the Frenchmen must be bold people, because both of the scientists that did this experiment were Frenchmen. One, Bertrand, I think, was a French chemist, and he ingested 5 grams of arsenic with equal amounts of charcoal, and he survived. Another French pharmacist ingested, before the French Academy of Medicine, 15 grams of charcoal, of strychnine. That's 10 times the lethal dose, with equal amounts of charcoal, and he survived. So these scientists had quite a bit of confidence in the effectiveness of charcoal. Now, although charcoal cannot absorb everything, it absorbs a lot of things. And you'll see on the screen a list of things that it can. Pesticides, gasoline, iodine, kerosene, radioactive substances, digitalis, hemlock, epithet. It just goes on. So there's a lot of things that may be harmfully ingested into the body that can be neutralized by charcoal. So how do we use charcoal today? How can you use it as a home remedy to benefit you? If you'll notice on the list, there's some pretty common illnesses or ailments that charcoal can be used for. Indigestion. Who in here hasn't had indigestion at some time or another? Raise your hand. I think most of us have. Yeah, you can use charcoal for that. Flatulence, it's used for osteoarthritis. People who have colostomy can use it to take, and do use it to take care of others in colostomy bags. Hepatitis, whitening of the teeth, liver failure. I had an experience once. My grandmother was in ICU in Louisiana, and I was there. I happened to be there at the time, and her liver enzymes began to go up, and they were concerned that she was really getting into trouble. And I knew I had learned about charcoal, and I wanted to get a charcoal poultice across her liver. But I didn't have any charcoal. So I sent my uncle to the pet store to get the charcoal from the fish tank, and I ground it up. This was all in faith. I didn't know if fish tank charcoal would work. It was all in faith. I ground up the charcoal, and the Lord honors faith, by the way. I ground up the charcoal, and I made a poultice. I made a bunch of them, actually, and I took them to the nurses in ICU. Of course, they looked at me like I was a Fruit Loop. But I said, would you please put these over my grandmother's liver? The next morning, her liver was normal. So don't tell me that it doesn't work. I've had too many experiences with charcoal to know. And it definitely works. Charcoal comes in, I believe, this is the next slide, yeah. It comes in many different forms. It comes in powder, which I have some here. This is not peanut butter, this is charcoal powder. It comes in capsules, it comes in tablets, and then of course in liquid suspension like they use in the hospital emergency rooms. But you can make that at home, just mix the powder and water together. And don't try to take charcoal powder just plain, you will be sorry. It dries up all the moisture in your mouth, and then you want to breathe, and it wants to go in your lungs, and you feel like you're going to die. So don't try that at home. I have a friend who did that, and he regretted it. I would like to just quickly demonstrate to you one of my favorite forms of the use of charcoal, and that's the poultice. If you'll notice on the overhead, it gives a little bit of equivalency. 1 tablespoon of charcoal powder is the equivalent to 4 capsules, is the equivalent to 8 tablets. Some people are concerned about the binders better than the tablets, and there are some that do have some harmful things. If you're vegan, there are some that have steroids in them that may be animal-based. And so you can find those vegan charcoal tablets. I have found them, if that's a concern. At any rate, the most effective form that I have found is to take the powder mixed in water. And you can actually make a slurry out of this. Mix the charcoal powder with water and let the charcoal settle to the bottom and drink the slurry water off the top. That's actually been used in neonatal jaundice to reverse jaundice in newborns. Now, the poultice. If you'll notice in the slide, when you make the charcoal poultice, it should be kind of like a thick paste or gel. Now, I like to use, it's good if you use something like flaxseed. Now, these are whole flax seeds. I prefer to use, if I'm not going to be able to heat my charcoal, I prefer to use ground flax. But the ground flax we accidentally put back in the fridge this morning after breakfast because we use it with our breakfast. And so I'm having to use whole flax. When I use whole flax, I prefer to heat the mixture because it causes the flaxseed to become like a jelly, sort of, and it helps to bind that charcoal together and keep it moist so that it doesn't dry out in the poultice. You can also use oats. It will do basically the same thing. I prefer flax. It seems to work a little bit better. You can make mini poultices out of Band-Aids if you have a bee sting or something. You can actually just take a little powder and moisten it, put it right on the Band-Aid out of the bee sting. It works great. Very simple remedy. And then here's some of the tablets. When I make the poultice, I put equal parts of charcoal. I've already put it in here for the sake of time. I just put a tablespoon of charcoal and a tablespoon of, this is whole flax. Like I said, if you are not going to heat it, it's better to use ground flax. If you can heat it, the whole flax is actually better. But I just mix equal parts together, and then I add a little water. And it's a little bit difficult to get the water and the charcoal to mix, so you have to work with it just a little bit. But a caution, if you're going to use a charcoal poultice on an open wound, charcoal can tattoo if you use it on an open wound. So the best way to use it if you have an infected wound may be just to make a slurry water and irrigate the wound with the charcoal water. But you can use a poultice if you don't mind the tattooing effect. I have some pictures after this that I want to show you. I added a little bit too much water because my flax is not brown, so I'm going to have to add a little more charcoal. But you can make the poultice out of anything. An old rag, just an old bandana, put it on there, and then you want to back it with some type of material that won't allow the liquid to leak through. I just use saran wrap. So I would just put the material on the center of this, put that on the wound, and then put saran wrap over it, and then you can bind it with an ace wrap, or just tape it. If it goes all the way around the extremity, if it's on an extremity, you can just tape the poultice to itself. You can use paper towels, if you want to make a poultice out of a paper towel. Who knows what these are? Bed tucks, underpads. These work great for poultices. Where I used to work, as a nurse, I worked in OB nursery. And a lot of the ladies, when they would leave, they were so excited to leave with their babies, they left what to me was a treasure. And so my boss let me go and get all of these. Some of them were unopened packs. So I had tons of these things. And when my friends through the years would get sick, I was ready. I had charcoal poultices ready for them. Okay, I'm going to have to add a little bit more charcoal powder to this because I do want to show you how to put this together. When you use the underpads, I'll show you what I do in order to make a very non-messy poultice. This is the best way that I've found to make charcoal poultices. And you can buy these, by the way, at Walmart. Okay. Like I said, normally I would heat this a little bit, but it's about the texture that I need. Oops. So you want it still a little bit wet. Can you see that? Okay. Now I use a plate and I peel this fibrous layer so that the cottony layer is here. I don't spread it on the cottony layer because it's hard to spread. The cotton likes to just roll up. Put this fibrous layer down on a plate or something that you don't mind getting messy. And put the charcoal on there. You can make these the size of a wound. If you have somebody, like your grandmother, who's having liver issues, you can make the thing to go across the entire abdomen. Once you get it on the fibrous part, just fold the other part over, tap it down so it kind of sticks. And then I just turn it over and just tape up the edges, and then you can put it right on the wound, whatever it is. It will absorb bacteria, it will absorb, sometimes it can actually pull liquid through the skin so that it helps to reduce inflammation. Now I made a mess with my charcoal up here, but I need to go to the next page because I want to share some things with you specifically. Where I'm from, in Alabama and where I lived in Kentucky, we have a lot of spiders. Now, I know you have spiders here in North Dakota because I've seen them. Do you have the brown recluse spider here? Okay. My husband says no, but what I read is they're not native to this area, but they can actually be shipped in, like in trucks and stuff like that. So, it is something that we need to be aware of that we can treat because you may run into somebody on a trip. You may go to Arkansas or Arizona or wherever, somewhere where they have a lot of brown recluse. And this is one very interesting thing. I want you to look at this. That's the brown recluse. They're also called the fiddleback, and that's, if you see right there, it kind of looks like a fiddle. That's what he looks like. They're not a very big spider, but they pack a punch. This is day 2 of a brown recluse spider bite. Okay? Day 1 basically just looked like a splotchy rash. You get it? This is day 3. This is day 4. Day 5. That's only 5 days after the spider bite. Day 6. Okay? Now, the thing with the brown recluse, when the brown recluse bites, it actually destroys the tissue. We had a guy, when I worked at a trauma clinic, let me back this up a little bit. When he came into our trauma clinic, his bite looked something like that. It was a confirmed brown recluse spider bite. I worked at a trauma clinic for it was a construction site. At peak construction, we had like 2,000 construction workers. So and it was a town about the size of Goodrich. So we had a huge influx of people all at one time. And so guys were living in some really not good places. Well, this guy got bitten by a brown recluse, and he came into our clinic, and he was my patient, and I showed it to the doctor because I thought that's what it was. The doctor confirmed it. The guy confirmed it. He said, yeah, I thought this little bitty brown spider, we knew this was a brown recluse. The doctor put him on high doses of Keflex and sent him home to Florida to his surgeon. He said, that's all I can do for you. Just go see your surgeon. Well, I asked the man before he left, I said, okay, The doctors had sent you home basically to go get surgery because by the time you get there, you saw the pictures like that. Sorry, I'm falling apart. At any rate, before he left, I asked him, I said, would you be willing to try something a little different? And he said, yeah, I don't want to have surgery. So this was back home in Alabama. I was still living in Alabama at the time. And I knew some people at UT Pines still. I had already finished working there and teaching. No, I hadn't been there yet. But I knew people there. At any rate, I sent him to UT Pines, where I eventually went and learned about natural remedies and stuff. And I called ahead and I asked them to fix him up with some charcoal poultices. And they did. Well, it was a month that went by, and I never saw the man again. I didn't know what happened. Well, as things go with construction workers, they kind of cycle through places again, I guess, as construction gets to different stages. And he had to come back to our site again. And he came to the clinic for something completely unrelated. And I said, hey, I remember you. You're the one with the brown recluse spider bite. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I went to my surgeon like your doctor told me. And he said, you don't need me. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, I started putting those poultices on, and it just healed. And he showed me where the bite was. It had just a little tiny scar. But I wish I had brought some pictures of some scarring from the brown recluse spider bite. But he put those poultices on there, and the Lord blessed. And, you know, I could tell you so many other stories. I have a few minutes, and I'll just share with you a few stories of my experiences with charcoal. You can mix, in the poultice, you can mix other herbs. And I like to use charcoal and comfrey together for wounds. It's very healing. I had a friend once. She was sharpening an axe on someone else's grindstone, and she didn't know that this fella had bolted down his grindstone. It was one of those with two wheels on it. And so she was sharpening the axe on one side, and as she was pressing the axe to one grindstone, the machine shifted, and just in instinct, she reached up her hand to keep it from falling, and guess what she put her hand on? The other grindstone. And it just immediately just denuded her hand. It took it, I mean, sections of it were right down to the meat, just raw. And she just looked at me with this stunned look on her face, and I just grabbed her, and I took her in the house, and I said, let's do this. I put some charcoal and comfrey together with poultices, and I put it on her hand, and I wrapped it up, and I said, no, you lay down, we'll put some ice on it. And it took the pain away so much, she went to sleep. And the next day, she hardly had any pain there because of the charcoal. I broke my arm one time while I was working at UG. I fell down a flight of stairs and head-butted the wall at the other end and landed on my arm. My head was okay, but I broke my arm. And the pain was so bad in my arm that night that I couldn't sleep. It was a hairline fracture, so they just put me in a splint. So some friends of mine came up that night and made a charcoal poultice and wrapped it around my arm, and within, it was less than a half an hour, the pain was gone, completely gone, and I went to sleep. I told you the story about my grandmother and her liver enzymes, but one of the most dramatic stories that I ever remember with charcoal during my time at UT Pines and working in the lifestyle center there, a friend of mine, he was a gentleman, had a patient from California who had hepatitis B. The man was going into hepatic coma in the evening. I mean, he was on his way out. And the doctors were debating, the doctors at UT were debating, do we take him to the emergency room? Should we leave him here? What should we do? They decided to do charcoal whirlpools. The man walked to breakfast the next morning. So it works. Obviously, there's no way that I can give dosages and all the treatments and all the ways to use charcoal, but I hope that this has been an introduction that will help you realize that God has given us many, many remedies that we can use that are not expensive. And I want to just show this quote to you at the end. Counsels on Diet and Foods, page 301. There are many ways of practicing the healing art, but there is only one way that heaven approves. God's remedies are the simple agencies of nature. that will not tax or debilitate the system through their powerful properties.
Amen.
And so I'm so grateful that the Lord has given us things like charcoal that we can use that are so simple. And I have seen, my mother nearly died last January, not this past, but the year before, 2012. She almost died. And I'd love to give that testimony sometime of how the Lord used only natural remedies. The doctors sent her home from the emergency room acutely ill. And my family there didn't even realize how ill she was. But the Lord took me back home to Alabama, and I did only natural remedies. And my mother survived. She had C. diff and was very ill. The doctors even were surprised. So the Lord's ways work. They're simple and they're affordable. Are there any questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Can a person use charcoal, like say to do a liver cleanse?
To do a liver cleanse?
Right.
That I'm not sure about. The way that I would think would be most effective to use it in liver cleansing would be as a poultice over the liver, like my grandmother's situation. But when you are looking at doing a liver cleanse, there's a lot more to that, and I'd be happy to talk with you about that afterward. My husband and I did one recently. But you can use it in cleansing in the poultice aspect. But as far as taking it internally, it won't hurt. People have taken as much as a cup of charcoal internally at one dose and no ill effects. And they've done this over a period of like 12 weeks at a time. No ill effects. The only caveat to that is that it can bind the stool. It can make you constipated. Drinking enough water, including other things in the diet to help alleviate that, can cause it. My sister, one time, this was years and years ago, we were just teenagers, someone gave her some charcoal for nausea, and it helped to settle her stomach. But that night, she did go ahead and throw up again, and she threw up black. And of course, my mother panicked. She didn't know she'd taken charcoal. She thought, my daughter has cancer. So this black stuff was coming out. But anyway, that is one of the main side effects, is just the constipation. Yes, sir.
The reason why charcoal is so effective is because it's chemically inert. It does not react with anything. So you're absolutely correct that the absorption is caused by electrostatic interaction, but it's not by chemical bonds.
Okay.
And the word chemical bond would imply chemical reactions and interactions. So that is the strength of charcoal, that it does not react with anything. It's inert.
Okay.
And as you again emphasized, and the secret is the large surface area. The electrostatic interaction. These are the two major things. And then, of course, when you put it on the skin, you have osmosis, and you, as you said, you close water, and whatever else is dissolved, close it right out of it.
Amen. Could everybody hear him? These are very important things that he said. I want you to say that again.
Well, no, everything you said was just great. And so the charcoal is chemically inert. It does not react with anything, and so that is why it's so effective. So the absorption is caused by electrostatic interactions and not by chemical reaction. No chemical bond. That was the only tiny correction I wanted to make, because if it forms chemical bond, that would imply that charcoal interacts chemically.
Okay.
With many things, and that is exactly the opposite.
Okay, I stand corrected. I did use the word electrostatic, but I also said chemical. So this is a scientist here, so he knows more about it than I do. So at any rate, it's time for Sabbath school, so we should have a prayer and close. And if anybody, by the way, let me mention this. I am pondering holding some classes on natural remedies at some point, maybe in the fall. So if you're interested in that, please see me afterward. Let's have a prayer and separate for our classes.